The sky over Omaha Beach had no color, just gray smoke and the white noise of men dying. Tom Delaney crouched in a shell crater, seawater up to his knees, the weight of the SCR-300 radio strapped to his back, dragging him deeper into the sand. Before you go, tell me, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how far these forgotten stories are reaching. And if this story made you stop and think, even for a moment, hit that subscribe button. Salt stung his eyes. Blood, not his, painted the rim of the crater in dark streaks. Around him, soldiers screamed coordinates into useless radios, their voices swallowed by static. He could hear the German MG-42 machine guns stuttering from the cliffs above. Each burst sounded like fabric tearing. Somewhere to his left, a man called for his mother. To his right, another soldier vomited seawater and breakfast into the surf. Tom yanked the radio handset to his ear. Nothing. Just the hiss of white noise, thick and suffocating like the ocean had learned to speak. Baker Company. This is Dog Green Actual. Do you copy? A voice somewhere behind him. Desperate. Pleading. No answer. The radios were dead. Not broken. Silenced. Tom had known this would happen. He'd known since April, since the rehearsals at Slapton Sands, since the night he intercepted the German transmissions and realized what they were doing. The Funkabwehr units, specialized jammers, were sweeping every Allied frequency, rotating like a lighthouse beam, drowning every voice in the channel, and command had done nothing. Tom's hands shook as he tore open the waterproof pouch strapped to his thigh. Inside, wrapped in waxed canvas, was the radio crystal he'd filed down by hand 3 weeks ago. Illegal, unauthorized, a court-martial waiting to happen, but right now, it was the only chance anyone had. He ripped the back panel off the SCR-300, ignoring the manual's warning about field modifications. Water dripped onto the circuits. His fingers, numb from cold, fumbled with the standard crystal, pulling it free. He slid the modified one into place, smaller, filed at an angle tuned to 39. 2 megahertz below the jamming band, a ghost frequency. The radio hummed, then crackled. Then, a voice. Unidentified station, this is USS Texas, fire control. Identify yourself. Tom's breath caught. A Navy destroyer, outside the German jamming range. Texas, this is Army signal, Dog Green sector. We are pinned down. German bunker, grid reference. He squinted at the smoke-choked cliffs, calculating angles the way his father had taught him on the docks. 479er 238. Bunker complex, 200 yards up. Active MG nest. Request immediate fire support. A pause. Static hissed like a living thing. Copy that, Dog Green. Stand by for fire mission. 10 seconds later, the world exploded. The bunker on the cliff, the one that had been spitting death for the last 20 minutes, vanished in a column of fire and concrete. The shockwave rolled down the beach, knocking men flat. Ears rang. The machine gun went silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then a sergeant stumbled past Tom's crater, staring at him with wide, uncomprehending eyes. What the hell did you just do? Tom didn't answer. He was already scanning the tree line, already tuning the dial, already calling in the next target. Because the radio was working. The impossible, illegal, unauthorized radio was working. And somewhere out there in the smoke and the chaos and the dying, other men needed a voice. But then, another sound, a new voice cutting through the static, calm, precise, speaking English with a German accent. We hear you, American. We are coming. Tom's hand froze on the dial. 6 weeks earlier, April 1944, southern England. The rain fell in sheets across the gray tents of the 29th Infantry Division staging area, outside Southampton. Inside a drafty briefing hut, Tom Delaney sat in the back row, watching condensation drip from the ceiling beams onto a map of France. The briefing officer, a captain with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like gravel, pointed at the coastline marked Omaha Beach. Gentlemen, Operation Overlord will be the largest amphibious invasion in history. 150,000 men, 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft. He paused. And every single one of you will need to communicate. Tom scribbled notes in a water-stained notebook. Frequencies, call signs, radio protocols. The captain continued. Each unit will operate on assigned frequencies. Navy on one band, Army on another, Air Corps on a third. This prevents crosstalk and maintains operational security. A hand went up. What about German jamming, sir? The captain's jaw tightened. Intelligence indicates limited enemy jamming capability. We'll have air superiority. Their stations will be neutralized before H hour. Tom stopped writing. He'd heard that before, at Slapton Sands. 3 weeks earlier, The Allies had rehearsed the invasion on a stretch of Devon coast that resembled Normandy. Tom had been there, hauling his SCR-300 through the surf, watching landing craft vomit soldiers onto the beach. The radios had failed within minutes. Not mechanical failure, something worse. Every frequency, 40 to 48 megahertz, drowned in a wall of white noise. Operators screamed into handsets. Officers waved flags like medieval knights. Entire battalions lost contact with command. Tom had crouched behind a dune, ripped open his radio and listened. The static wasn't random, it had a rhythm, a pattern, like a searchlight sweeping the sky. He'd tuned to the edge of the band, 39 megahertz, and the noise thinned. For 5 seconds he could hear voices. Then the sweep returned, burying everything. That night, Tom filed a report, handwritten, 3 pages. He described the jamming pattern, the rotation speed, the gaps in coverage. He proposed a solution: tune radios outside the standard band into frequencies the Germans weren't sweeping. The report went to his platoon sergeant, who sent it to his company commander, who forwarded it to battalion signals. 2 weeks later, Tom received a response. A single word stamped in red ink: denied. Back in the briefing hut, the captain was still talking. Radio discipline will be critical. Do not deviate from assigned frequencies. Do not improvise. Follow protocol. Tom raised his hand. Sir, what if the Germans jam our frequencies? The captain's expression hardened. They won't. But at Slapton Sands was a training exercise, Corporal. The enemy will not have that capability on D-Day. Tom felt the eyes of the room on him. He swallowed the next question. After the briefing, he walked back to his tent through the rain. Inside, he pulled a folded paper from his footlocker. The denied report. He smoothed it on his bunk, rereading his own handwriting. Recommendation: issue modified crystals tuned to 39, 2 megahertz and 49, 1 megahertz. These frequencies fall outside standard jamming range and maintain compatibility with Allied receivers. Someone had scrawled a note in the margin: not authorized, maintain equipment as issued. Tom crumpled the paper, then uncrumpled it. He pulled a small wooden box from under his bunk. Inside, 3 quartz crystals, a jeweler's file, a candle stub, and a roll of copper wire, contraband, stolen from the repair depot. If command wouldn't listen, he'd do it himself. Over the next 3 weeks, Tom worked in secret. At night, after inspections, he'd light the candle and file down the crystals by hand, measuring frequencies with a borrowed oscilloscope he'd bribed off a Navy radio man. He built 6 modified radios, each one tuned to ghost frequencies, channels the Germans wouldn't think to jam because they weren't supposed to exist. He marked each radio with a small D scratched inside the battery compartment, for Delaney or Defiance. He wasn't sure which. Other operators noticed. They called it Delaney's death wish. One sergeant told him, "You're going to get court-martialed before you ever see France." Tom just kept filing, because he'd learned something his commanders hadn't. He'd learned it from 3 years on merchant ships. Listening to U-boats hunt convoys in the North Atlantic, the enemy wasn't stupid. They were listening, and they'd prepared. 2 days before the invasion, Tom intercepted a German transmission. It was in English. Practiced. Calm. Allied forces will use frequencies 40 to 48 megahertz. Stair units will commence jamming at H-hour. Rotate sweep every 30 seconds. No gaps. They will be blind. Tom's blood went cold. He wrote another report. This time, he hand-delivered it to the battalion commander's tent. A lieutenant stopped him at the entrance. "What's this? Enemy intercept, sir? They know our frequencies. They're going to jam us." The lieutenant glanced at the report. "Where's this from?" "I intercepted it myself. Last night, 2300 hours. The lieutenant handed it back. "You're not authorized to monitor enemy channels, Corporal." "Sir, they're going to..." Dismissed. Tom stood in the rain, holding the soaked paper. That night, he packed the 6 modified radios into supply crates marked for Omaha Beach. He didn't ask permission. He didn't file paperwork. He just made sure they'd be there, because if command wouldn't protect the men, he would. On June 4th, during the channel crossing, one of the modified radios was discovered. A quartermaster found it during a random inspection. Major William Cross, the battalion commander, called Tom to his cabin. "Is this yours, Delaney?" Tom looked at the radio. The scratched D glinted in the lamplight. "Yes, sir." "You modified Army equipment without authorization?" "Yes, sir." Major Cross walked to the porthole, staring at the gray water. "Do you know what happens to soldiers who sabotage equipment?" Tom said nothing. Cross picked up the radio, turned it over, then walked onto the deck and hurled it into the English Channel. Tom watched it disappear beneath the foam. "You're lucky I don't throw you after it," Cross said. "One more stunt like this, and you'll spend the war in a stockade." Tom saluted. "Understood, sir." But as he walked away, he allowed himself a small, grim smile. Because Major Cross had only found one radio. The other 5 were already in Normandy. Red Hook, Brooklyn, 1932. Tom Delaney was 16 years old the first time he lied about his age. He stood on the pier at Columbia Street, watching a merchant freighter named SS Waltham load cargo. The ship needed a radio operator. The pay was $12 a week. Tom needed the money. His father, Frank Delaney, worked the docks as a longshoreman. Strong back, weak lungs. 30 years of breathing coal dust and engine fumes had turned his cough into something permanent, something that rattled in his chest like loose bolts. Tom knew the math. His father wouldn't last another 5 years. The family needed income. So Tom walked up to the hiring officer, added 2 years to his age, and said he'd been operating ship radios since he was 14. The officer looked him over. Skinny kid, calloused hands, eyes that didn't blink. "You know Morse?" Tom tapped out a message on the desk with his knuckles. "HIREME. The officer smiled. "You're on." For the next 4 years, Tom worked the Atlantic routes. He learned to tune through storms, through static, through the crackle of illegal transmissions from rum runners and pirates. He learned that a radio wasn't just a machine, it was a lifeline. And if you couldn't make it work, people died. He was good at it, reliable, fast. Other operators called him Brooklyn because he never lost the accent, never softened the edges, but they trusted him. When the waves were high and the signal was weak, Brooklyn could pull a voice out of the noise. March 1942. Tom was 26, still working merchant ships, still sending money home to his mother. His father had died 2 years earlier. Lungs finally gave out, but Tom kept the man's pocket watch. A cheap brass thing, dented and scratched, but it kept time. On March 14th, Tom was ashore in New York when he got the telegram. SS Penelope torpedoed, stop 200 miles east of Newfoundland. Stop, no survivors. Stop. His father's younger brother, Tom's Uncle Vincent, had been the radio operator on the Penelope. The ship had sent an SOS. No one heard it. Later, Tom found out why. German U-boats had been jamming distress frequencies, blocking calls for help, letting ships sink in silence. Vincent Delaney drowned in the North Atlantic because his voice couldn't reach anyone. Tom stood in his mother's kitchen, holding the telegram, and made a decision. He enlisted the next day. U.S. Army Signal Corps, June 1942. Tom didn't want to be a hero. He wanted to fix the problem. During basic training, instructors noticed his skill with radios. They assigned him to advanced signal school. He learned military protocols, encryption, frequency management, but he also learned something else. The Army didn't like improvisation. There were manuals for everything. Procedures, regulations. You didn't modify equipment, you didn't question the design, you followed orders. Tom hated it. One night during a field exercise, his unit's radio failed. The instructor said, "Call for a replacement and wait." Tom opened the casing, found a loose solder joint, and fixed it with a cigarette lighter and a paper clip. The instructor wrote him up for unauthorized modification. Tom didn't care. The radio worked. Before he shipped out to England, Tom's mother gave him something. They stood on the same pier where he'd first lied about his age, watching troop ships load in the harbor. She pressed a small object into his hand, his father's pocket watch. "Your Uncle Vincent had one just like it," she said. "It stopped when the ship went down, 0347. That's the time he died." Tom looked at the watch. It was still running, ticking softly against his palm. "Don't be a hero, Tommy," his mother said. Her voice cracked. "Just come home." Tom kissed her forehead. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. On the ship to England, he opened the watch. Inside the case, his mother had tucked a small photograph. Uncle Vincent in his radio operator's uniform, smiling, one hand resting on a transmitter. Tom stared at the photo for a long time. Then he closed the watch and put it in his chest pocket, over his heart. April 1944. Southampton. Late one night after the briefing where the captain had dismissed his warnings, Tom sat alone in his tent. Rain hammered the canvas. He lit a candle and pulled out a piece of paper. He started writing a letter to his mother. "Dear Ma, I know you told me not to be a hero. I'm trying, but I keep thinking about Uncle Vincent, about how he called for help and no one heard him, about how he died because the signal didn't get through. I'm a radio operator now, same job Vincent had, and I can see it happening again. The brass won't listen. They think the equipment will work because the manual says it will. But I've heard the enemy. I know what they're doing. If I don't do something, other men are going to drown. Not in water, but in static. They're going to call for help and no one will hear them. So I'm going to make sure they're heard. I don't know if that makes me a hero or a fool. Maybe both." Tom stopped writing. He read the letter twice, then he held it over the candle. The paper curled, blackened, turned to ash. He couldn't send it. She'd worry. She'd beg him not to take risks. And he couldn't promise her that, because he'd already made a different promise to Uncle Vincent, to every man who'd ever called for help and gotten silence. Tom pulled the pocket watch from his chest pocket. AO347, the time his uncle died. He wound the watch, set it, let it tick. Then he picked up the jeweler's file and went back to work on the crystals. He wasn't doing this for glory. He wasn't doing it for medals. He was doing it because if he didn't, the voices would drown again. And this time, he'd be the one who let them. May 1944, Southampton staging area. The other radio operators called it Delaney's death wish. Tom had made the mistake of showing them his modified crystal during a routine equipment check. He'd explained the jamming problem, the frequency gaps, the solution. He'd even offered to help them build their own. Corporal Eddie Marsh laughed first. "You trying to get us all killed, Brooklyn?" "I'm trying to keep you alive," Tom said. "By breaking regs?" Sergeant Bill Kowalski shook his head. "You know what happens if command finds out? Court-martial, stockade, dishonorable discharge. They won't find out. They always find out." Another operator, Private Hector Ruiz, a kid from El Paso with nervous hands and a habit of chewing his thumbnail, stared at the crystal like it might explode. "This is insane," Ruiz said. "You're telling me you filed down a quartz crystal in a tent by candlelight with a jeweler's file?" "That's right. And you think it'll work?" "I know it'll work. I tested it." Kowalski snorted. "Where? In your dreams?" Tom pulled a folded chart from his pocket. Signal strength readings, frequency bands, test results from late-night transmissions when the officers were asleep. "I tuned to 39.2 MHz. Got a clean signal to a Navy ship 12 miles offshore. Zero interference. The Germans aren't jamming that band because it's not in our manual." Marsh grabbed the chart, squinted at it, then handed it back. "So what? You break protocol? You get one lucky transmission, and you think that's going to save the invasion? It's not luck, it's math. It's suicide, and the mockery spread. Within a week, every radio operator in the battalion had heard about Delaney's Frankenstein radio. Some laughed, some ignored him. A few, like Ruiz, watched from a distance, curious but silent. One evening, Tom overheard Marsh talking to a group near the mess tent. "Brooklyn thinks he's smarter than the engineers at RCA. Guy can't even finish high school, but sure, he's gonna reinvent radio." Laughter rippled through the group. Tom kept walking. He'd heard worse on the docks. But the real problem wasn't the mockery. It was the brass. Lieutenant Andrew Hale, the signals officer, called Tom into his tent. "Delaney, I've been hearing rumors." "Sir?" "Rumors that you've been modifying Army equipment." Tom met his eyes. "I've been testing alternative frequencies, sir. The standard band is vulnerable to—" "I know what you think." Hale cut him off. "I read your report, the one that got denied. Then you know the radios are going to fail." "What I know," Hale said slowly, "is that you're a corporal, not an engineer, not a strategist. You follow orders, you use the equipment as issued, and you let the people who actually understand radio theory make the decisions." Tom's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, I've been operating radios since I was 16. "I know. You know how to turn dials and follow manuals. That's it." Hale leaned forward. "If I catch you modifying one more piece of equipment, I will personally see to it that you spend D-Day in the stockade. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Dismissed." Tom walked out of the tent, hands clenched into fists. That night, he didn't stop working. He just got quieter. He built the radios in secret. After lights out, he'd slip into the supply depot. He'd befriended the quartermaster with a bottle of Irish whiskey and work by the light of a shielded lantern. He filed crystals, soldered connections, waterproofed casings with beeswax and paraffin. Each radio got a small D scratched inside the battery compartment. His signature, his rebellion. By the end of May, he had 6 modified SCR 300s, each one tuned to ghost frequencies, 39, 2 MHz, and 49, 1 MHz. Outside the German jamming range, inside the realm of possibility. He packed them into supply crates marked for Omaha Beach. Medical supplies, ammunition, rations. No one checked, no one cared, except Ruiz. The kid found Tom one night in the depot, bent over a radio, soldering iron in hand. "Jesus, Brooklyn, you're really doing this." Tom didn't look up. "Go back to your tent, Ruiz. What if you're wrong? Then I'm wrong. And what if you're right and they find out anyway?" Tom set down the iron. "Then I get court-martialed. But at least the radios will be there." Ruiz chewed his thumbnail. "This is crazy." "Yeah, you could lose everything. I already lost my uncle because a radio didn't work. I'm not losing anyone else." Ruiz was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up a second soldering iron. "Show me how to do it," Tom smiled. "You sure?" "No, but if we're going to die, I'd rather die with a radio that works." June 4th, 1944, the Channel crossing. Tom stood on the deck of the transport ship, watching the gray water churn below. Somewhere in the hold, 5 of his modified radios were packed in crates, hidden among 1,000 tons of supplies. One radio, the 6th, was strapped to his back. That's the one Major Cross found. The inspection happened at dawn, a random check. Bad luck. The quartermaster pulled Tom's crate, opened it, and saw the scratched D inside the radio's casing. "Sir, you need to see this." Major Cross arrived, examined the radio. His face hardened. "This is modified." "Yes, sir." "You did this?" "Yes, sir." Cross didn't yell. He just walked to the railing, held the radio over the water, and let it drop. Tom watched it fall, watched it hit the surface, watched it sink beneath the foam, swallowed by the channel. "You're lucky I don't throw you after it," Cross said. "One more stunt like this, Delaney, and you'll spend the war in a cell. Understood?" "Understood, sir." But as Tom turned to leave, he allowed himself the smallest smile. Because Major Cross had only found one radio, the other 5 were already on their way to France. And in 48 hours, when the radios failed and the beach turned into chaos and men started dying because no one could hear them, Tom's death wish would be the only thing keeping them alive. June 6th, 1944. 0347 hours. Tom checked his father's pocket watch. Same time, 2 years to the minute since Uncle Vincent drowned. The landing craft pitched in the dark channel waters. Men vomited, prayed, held their rifles like children held blankets. Tom sat near the front, radio strapped to his back, eyes closed, breathing slowly. He could hear the naval bombardment, distant thunder rolling across the water. In 3 hours, he'd be on Omaha Beach. 0630 hours, 8 hour. The ramp dropped. Machine gun fire tore into the landing craft before Tom's boots hit the water. Men fell, screamed, disappeared beneath the surf. Tom lunged forward, radio dragging him down, seawater burning his throat. He couldn't see the beach, just smoke and the strobing muzzle flashes from the cliffs. Someone grabbed his collar, yanked him toward a steel obstacle. Corporal Eddie Marsh, the same man who'd mocked him in England. "Stay down," Marsh yelled. Tom crouched behind the obstacle, lungs heaving. Around them, radios crackled. Officers shouted into handsets, nothing but static. "Baker Company, this is Dog Green Actual, do you copy?" White noise. "Any station, this is Fox Red. Fire support needed, grid reference." Static swallowed the rest. Tom pulled his modified crystal from the waterproof pouch. His hands shook, not fear, cold. He ripped open the SCR 300, seawater dripping onto the circuits, and swapped the crystal. The radio hummed, cleared. "Unidentified station, this is USS Texas, fire control." Tom's breath caught. He called in the bunker coordinates. 10 seconds later, the cliff exploded. Marsh stared at him. "What the hell did you just do?" Tom didn't answer. He was already tuning to the next frequency. 0730 hours. Tom had become the only voice on Omaha Beach. He crouched in a shell crater, radio balanced on his knees, blood from a shrapnel graze mixing with seawater on the keypad. Every Allied unit was calling for support, medevac, artillery, airstrikes, and every call was coming through him. "Dog Green Actual, this is Brooklyn, fire mission grid 479er238. Brooklyn, Texas copies, rounds out." The beach shook, German positions evaporated, but the radio was overheating. The modified crystal, filed too thin, pushed too hard, was cracking under the strain. Tom dunked the radio in a tidal pool. Steam hissed. The crystal held. Barely. Then Ruiz appeared, crawling through the sand, dragging another radio. "Brooklyn, I found one of your crates." Tom's heart jumped. "Is it marked?" Ruiz flipped it over. A scratched D glinted inside the casing. "Get it working. Now." They worked side by side, hands slick with blood and salt water, swapping crystals, splicing antennas with copper wire torn from a destroyed Bangalore torpedo. 1130 hours. Tom had been transmitting for 5 hours straight. His voice was hoarse. His fingers bled from toggle switches. The radio's keypad had shorted. He had to hold the send button manually, palm pressed against hot metal. Ruiz handled the second radio, relaying coordinates to Navy destroyers while Tom coordinated medevac helicopters. Then the German transmission cut in. "Ghost operator, we have triangulated your position. Mortar team, prepare to fire on my mark." Tom's blood turned to ice. They'd found him. Ruiz heard it too. His face went white. "Brooklyn, we need to shut down, now." Tom looked at the radio, then at the beach. Wounded men everywhere. Medics screaming for evacuation coordinates. A platoon pinned down near the seawall calling for artillery support. If he shut down, they died. If he kept transmitting, The Germans would drop mortars on his position. 10 seconds. That's all he had. Tom made his choice. Ruiz, get to cover. I'm staying. You're insane. Go. Ruiz hesitated. Then he grabbed Tom's collar and tackled him into the crater just as the first mortar hit. The explosion was white light and pressure. Tom's ears screamed. Blood trickled from his left ear, eardrum blown. But the radio, clutched against his chest, was still transmitting. Ruiz stared at him, eyes wide. I'm sorry I doubted you. Tom wiped blood from his face. Tell me that when we're alive. 1400 hours. The crystal finally cracked. A hairline fracture split it down the middle. Tom stared at it. The radio was dying. He pulled out his bayonet, carefully wedged the blade into the crack, and used electrical tape to splint the crystal like a broken bone. It held. The radio crackled back to life. Marsh, who'd been watching from another crater, crawled over. That shouldn't work. It doesn't, Tom said, but it's working anyway. For another hour, Tom transmitted. His palm was burned from holding the shorted button. His voice was gone. He whispered coordinates into the handset like prayers. But the beach was clearing. Tanks were moving inland. Medics were evacuating the wounded. And every single call for help had gone through Tom's illegal, jury-rigged, court-martial-worthy radio. 1800 hours. Major Cross found Tom slumped in a crater. Radio still clutched in his hands. Blood dried on his face. Delaney. Tom looked up, half-deaf, exhausted. Sir. Cross crouched beside him, picked up the radio. Saw the splinted crystal, the burned keypad, the scratched D. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, you disobeyed a direct order. Yes, sir. You modified Army equipment without authorization. Yes, sir. Cross turned the radio over in his hands. How many men did you save today? Tom didn't answer. Cross stood. Get to the aid station, that's an order. The radio, I'll take care of the radio. Tom watched him walk away, still holding the modified SCR-300. He didn't know if Cross was going to destroy it or study it. He was too tired to care. Ruiz helped him to his feet. You think they'll court-martial you? Tom touched his father's pocket watch. Still ticking. Still keeping time. I don't know, but the voices got through. That was enough. June 7th, 1944. Field Hospital, Normandy. Tom woke to silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence of deafness. His left ear heard nothing. A medic had packed it with gauze, told him the eardrum was gone, permanent damage. The right ear worked barely, muffled and ringing. A shadow fell across his cot. Major Cross. Tom tried to sit up. Cross waved him down. Stay put, Delaney. He pulled up a folding chair, sat. For a long moment, he just looked at the modified radio sitting on the table beside them, the splinted crystal, the burned keypad, the scratched D. I should court-martial you, Cross said finally. Tom said nothing. What could he say? You disobeyed orders. Modified equipment without authorization operated outside approved frequencies. Cross picked up the radio. This violates at least 6 regulations. Tom met his eyes. Yes, sir. But then I talked to the Navy. USS Texas logged 43 fire missions yesterday. Every single one came from your frequency. Cross set the radio down. I talked to the medevac pilots. They said you were the only voice they could reach for 5 hours. Saved over 200 wounded. Tom's throat tightened. And then, Cross continued, I intercepted a German transmission. Their jamming commander filed a report. Want to know what it said? Tom waited. Allied forces utilizing unauthorized frequencies outside standard band. Unable to jam. Request immediate countermeasures. Cross almost smiled. You scared them, Delaney. They didn't know what the hell you were doing. Neither did we, sir. Cross stood. I'm not charging you, but I'm not commending you either. Officially, this never happened, understood? Yes, sir. Cross walked to the tent entrance, then stopped. Off the record, you saved the beachhead, and I'm making damn sure every radio operator in Normandy knows it. June 12th, 1944. Word spread like smoke. Tom never held a briefing, never gave a speech. But within days, radio operators across Normandy were asking quiet questions. How did Brooklyn bypass the jamming? What frequency did he use? Where can we get crystals? No official memo was issued. No directive came from command. But mechanics started filing crystals. Operators started testing ghost frequencies. Supply sergeants started looking the other way. By the end of June, dozens of modified radios were operating across the front. Some called them Brooklyn Specials. Others just called them The Fix. Command pretended not to notice because the radios worked and men were coming home alive. August 1945. Red Hook, Brooklyn. Tom came home with a Purple Heart he never wore, a hearing aid he tried to hide, and a duffel bag containing one item, a cracked radio crystal wrapped in electrical tape. He didn't talk about the war. When neighbors asked, he'd shrug. Radio operator, nothing special. He got a job working tugboats in New York Harbor. Same piers where he'd lied about his age at 16. Same docks where his father had worked until his lungs gave out. Tom was good at the job, reliable, quiet. The other operators called him Brooklyn, just like the old days. But sometimes when the radios crackled with static, Tom would freeze, his hands would shake. And he'd have to walk away until the ringing in his good ear stopped. He married in 1947, Mary O'Connor, a nurse who'd worked the field hospitals in France. She never asked about the scars. He never asked about hers. They had 2 sons. Tom taught them how to fix engines, how to solder, how to listen. He never taught them about war. A letter arrived. U.S. Army Signal Corps, official letterhead. It sat on Tom's kitchen table for 3 days before he opened it. Dear Corporal Delaney, we are conducting a study of radio communication techniques employed during the Normandy invasion. Multiple after-action reports reference unauthorized frequency deviation, credited with maintaining operational comms during initial assault. We request your assistance in documenting these techniques for potential application in current operations, Korea. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. Tom read it twice. Then he folded it, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in a drawer. Mary found it weeks later. Tom, they're asking for your help. I know. You should respond. I did my part. He looked at her. I'm not going back. The letter stayed in the drawer, unanswered. 50 years after D-Day, a military historian named Dr. Sarah Chen found Tom's name buried in a declassified report. She tracked him to Red Hook, knocked on his door on a humid June afternoon. Tom was 78, gray hair, thick glasses, hearing aid in his right ear. Mr. Delaney, I'm researching D-Day communications. I found your name in a Navy fire control log. It says you coordinated 43 artillery strikes from Omaha Beach using a non-standard frequency. Tom leaned on his cane. That was a long time ago. I'm trying to understand how you did it. The reports say you saved hundreds of lives. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then, I just kept talking, that's all. But how? The system was broken. Men were dying because they couldn't be heard. So I made sure they were heard. He looked past her, toward the harbor. That's not heroism. That's just doing what had to be done. Chen tried to ask more questions. Tom politely declined, but he did give her one thing. From a shelf in his workshop, he pulled down a wooden box. Inside, the cracked crystal, the splintered quartz that had kept a beach alive. You can have this, Tom said. Put it in a museum, or don't. Doesn't matter. It does matter, Mr. Delaney. People should know. People should know that sometimes the rules are wrong. And when they're wrong, you don't wait for permission to fix them. He closed the box. That's the only lesson worth remembering. November 1998. Tom Delaney died in his sleep, 82 years old. His obituary in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle mentioned his merchant marine service, his work on the tugboats, his 2 sons. It did not mention D-Day. At his funeral, a stranger appeared. An older man, gray-haired, wearing a 1st Infantry Division cap. He approached Mary. Ma'am, I don't know if your husband ever told you, but he saved my life. June 6, 1944. I was pinned down on Omaha, called for medevac. He answered, got me out. The man's voice broke. I never knew his name until last week. I just knew the voice. Brooklyn. Mary smiled through tears. He never told me. He wouldn't, but I wanted you to know. The man handed her a folded flag. From the men who made it home. Today in a glass case at the Brooklyn VFW Post 1636. There's a radio, SCR 300, serial number scratched off. Inside the battery compartment, a single letter, D. No plaque explains it, no label tells the story. But sometimes, late at night, veterans stop and stare at it, and they remember a voice in the static, a voice that refused to go silent, a voice that broke the rules and kept men alive. Tom Delaney never wanted to be a hero. He just wanted people to be heard. Sometimes that's the same thing. What would you have done? When the system fails, do you follow orders, or do you become the voice no one else will be? If you know stories like this, share them. The world needs to remember the people who refuse to stay silent.